Hi, everyone.
Hello.
This is Kelly Berger. I am the Executive Director for Texas Hands and Voices, and I just wanted to welcome you to our webinar. We were having a few little technical difficulties making sure that our closed captioning was adequate and where it needed to be, but I think we're worked out on that. So I am going to turn this over to Sarah Milem and Eli Gaffney and let them start. And then we also have Jennifer Johnson, who's going to be talking to us about some safety goals that we can move into our IEPs and our IFSPs to help our children learn about their safety and make sure that they know how to get people's attention appropriately and who to go to and how to report things. So with no further ado, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself and Eli and get started?
Yeah, let's do this. Kelly, I did not get a chance to get something on Facebook, if you could do that for me though. Okay. I am Sarah Milem. I am the board president for Texas Hands and Voices. I'm also a trainer in our ASTRA program, and I work as a parent guide in our Guide by Your Side program. We're here tonight. I'm going to be talking a little bit about IEPs and ARDs and how to get ready for those and things you should know. Oftentimes as parents, we forget why it's so important for us to be on top of these things, especially with our kids in the middle who we think are kind of getting by okay. We often fail to realize how much those supports are necessary for our kids and how important it is for us to stay on top of them. So we're just going to be going over some things you can watch out for tonight, ways you can work with your kid, and how we can help. So next slide. So first and foremost, when we're talking about IEPs, ARD meetings, IFSPs, is planning and communicating before the meeting. We really don't want to go into meetings and have surprises. We should know if there's sticky issues before we go in, and ideally go in with a pretty good idea about what's going to happen. And be able to articulate what we need and what our child needs. And notice I say need and not want. Often as parents, we have to step aside from what we would just want and really be able to gather the data for what our child needs so that educators can understand it. And one way that we do that is by looking at grade level and developmental checklists. You know, these are things that educators are looking at, and we need to be looking at them too. So for example, with a kindergarten student, it's one thing to say, well, you know, I think they're just not doing all the things their friends are doing. It's another thing to say they cannot hold their scissors properly and they don't take turns well. And when someone calls their name, they do not respond appropriately. And according to this age level checklist, they should be doing these things by that age. Now we have data to show that they're behind. We need to get those from multiple sources, and the school will help you gather some of those checklists if you ask. You want to get some pre-meetings together. Get together with your special ed coordinator, your deaf ed teacher, anybody you think may be really relevant to the conversation for you. Get with them first. Talk about the things that you know are going to be trouble. See how much stuff you can kind of come to an agreement on first, so that when you get to the hard stuff in the meeting, that's all you're really having to work through. And so you can do your research ahead of time to be ready for the meeting rather than coming in blind. Make sure you have a copy of all of your child's evaluations before the meeting. This is something we forget to ask for a lot of times. And it's okay to just shoot them an email and say, hey, can you send me a copy of the evaluations that were done last time? I'd like to have a chance to review those. Now, you get in that meeting, you have to be willing to brainstorm and work with the school. They are not there to be out to get you. Often their hands are tied. They're working under a lot of constraints. And we can think and suggest things that are not within their purview to suggest. My favorite example with my own child was, he was in a classroom with tile floors. It was an acoustic nightmare. I wanted them to make some acoustic modifications. Well, no one wants to say it, but that's expensive. And I finally said, what if we just put tennis balls on the bottom of the chairs? Well, again, it sounds expensive until we think about, what if we get used tennis balls from the tennis team? Suddenly it's a reasonable request. So we've got to be willing to brainstorm with them. Send all about my kid letters. I've seen some great ones in this last week or two. Letting teachers that may not be as familiar with your kid know what your child's history is, a little bit about them, their communication method, their preferences, how to get in touch with you directly, and then find out how they prefer to communicate. Some teachers prefer email, some prefer text, some will tell you, it takes me to the next day to get back. I can't get back to you until after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever that is. Be prepared for that and get it up front, write it down. Because when you respect their time, they're going to be more likely to get back with you. And then, of course, just learning more about the IEP process in general. Next slide.
Right.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Oh, there we go. I'm Eli Gaffney. I am a teacher in Cypress School District on the west side of Houston. I have been teaching in the deaf education field. This will be my 8th year. And I am a listening and spoken language specialist. So I was thinking and brainstorming with Sarah about some questions that I would love for parents to bring to an IEP meeting, something that I think that would help us collaborate better. So I have some questions here that I would love to discuss before a meeting, something that would help us be all on the same page before we got started. So if a parent were to ask me about the report, which part describes the child best, then we can talk about, maybe what other evaluations do we need to look at if the report doesn't describe your child as accurately as you would like. What areas, based on the results of the assessment, what areas do we need to target? And they're using those targets to set up the goals for the IEP, because we always want our goals to be connected to any weaknesses that we might find in assessments. Brainstorming what services and supports might work well, because we know all of our kids are unique and individuals. So what works for one kid is not what works for another kid. Let's think outside of the box there. And then having a time frame. What's a reasonable amount of time for all of these goals? I think it's very common for us to say just by the next IEP meeting, but that's not our only option. And I want to make sure that we're discussing what other timeframes might be reasonable. And then what comes next? Talking about those developmental hierarchies that Sarah mentioned, being familiar with those, and making sure that your team knows what comes next, that they are also familiar with those hierarchies. Having parents ask for ways to help carry over in the home is always a great thing to discuss. I think we came up with some really innovative ideas. And then how can we break things down? When we're talking about accommodations and modifications for an IEP, if there's an assignment in the curriculum that seems that it would be a struggle, how could we break it down into chunks and kind of create sub-assignments that would allow the child to meet the same goal in just a slightly different way? So if you ask any of these questions in a meeting, I really encourage you to follow up to that answer with asking why, because a professional should always be able to explain their why. They should always have a rationale behind it that they can articulate to you. And then I do encourage parents to be able to explain their why as well. I think we're doing some really great collaboration, so make sure that those great things that other people are asking for, that you know why it would apply to you and your child as well. can go to the next slide.
Okay, so we've done all this pre-work and we get to the actual meeting. What kind of things are we actually going to be working on? It's really easy to focus on the speech goals, the language goals even, the math, the reading, and forget a lot of other really important things. Take the time to really consider those social, emotional, and self-advocacy skills that are so important to our kids. There are a couple of different checklists that you can use to kind of help develop some of those goals. My favorite ones are the Minnesota compensatory skills and social skills checklists. There's also the informal inventory of independence, and another commonly used one is the Iowa expanded core curriculum. And those go K through 12 and walk you through exactly the types of things your child should be doing at each age in those categories. So you can walk through and say, okay, my child is doing this, is not doing this. These are the things I think we can work on at home. And here's where I'd like to partner with the school and suggest a goal. And acknowledge your own realities and limitations. I hear this all the time where the school tells a family, well, that's something, we really don't do that. That's something you have to just focus on at home. But that's not always realistic, especially if we are talking about academic goals and the additional support our kids may need. If your child is coming home and they're requiring multiple hours of support that you simply do not have to give, then you need to let the school know that so that they can support your child differently. And then again, just being willing to brainstorm that, be flexible, ask for a trial period. If you've got an idea and they're a little hesitant, can we try this for 90 days and reconvene? Can we collect some more data over that 90 days? Really put it in terms that they can understand. Next slide. All right, this is my favorite slide of all. Things you must know, because every time I go over these things, I had no idea. First, you can disagree with what happens in an ARD or an IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting. It is okay to say, I don't agree. We always want to do our best to come to some sort of a resolution and some sort of a consensus, but some days that just doesn't happen. And when that doesn't happen, it's all right. When that happens, you have a lot of different options that we can go into a lot of detail about as far as how to document when you don't agree. But you just need to know you don't always just have to say whatever you say. You have a right to have all of the evaluations explained to you. And sometimes that means sitting there and saying, talk to me like I'm 5. Make them stop and put it in layman's terms. It's okay. That's your right as a parent to understand the things they're discussing. Don't just let people talk around you. Ask questions until you are an equal part of the conversation. You have the right to pause the meeting or finish it another day. If something happens and you get emotional or it gets heated or something just happens and you feel you need to gather more information or whatever the case may be, it's okay to say, you know what, we're going to need to reconvene this. Or, common scenario, they say, oops, our teachers have to get back to class. We've only got a sub for an hour. We need to go ahead and get this signed, thanks. It's okay to say, you know what, I understand everybody's got to get back to class. When would you like to schedule for us to finish this? You don't just have to sign and move on. It's okay to say, when can we finish? Instead of feeling rushed to just sign off on whatever's presented. Most important, and a lot of people forget this, you are an equal member of the ARD team in every sense of the word. And that is a legal thing. If it were ever to go all the way down the legal stream. It is very important for you to understand that you are considered an equal member of that ARD committee. Your opinion, your data, all of that input matters. And so you need to remember that you feel like you may be being brushed off. And when you sit down at that table and you're overwhelmed by this team of professionals, you need to remember you're sitting down as a member of that team, not just someone they're talking at. Which leads me to, you have a right to present goals of your own. Oftentimes we sit down to a draft IEP, they've made up all of our goals and they just kind of want us to sign. Well, what if we've got our own ideas? What if we've got really challenging goals? What if we think their goals aren't enough? What if we think that what they're doing to meet those goals isn't enough? There's been some recent case law that's linked in our slide deck, the Andrew case, that makes it very clear that if a district is not presenting challenging goals and changing their practices in order to meet those challenging goals, then that is as good as providing no educational benefit at all. You have the right to request written documentation of why they said no to your request. This is called prior written notice. I call this the if no, then why theory. Anytime you make a formal request for something to happen, a goal, a service, a placement, and they say no, then you have the right for them to give you in writing their no and their why and their legal basis for that why. Oftentimes, it's very easy for a district to say no. No. Very different when they're forced to really look at it and say, can we actually legally say no to this issue? And it really can change the tone of the conversation. Not because they're trying to do wrong, but often they've never had to really consider, is this within the legal bounds of what we're required to do, or is this just what we've always done? You have a right to include your child in the meeting and to share information from home. Sometimes the most powerful information is what comes from home or what comes directly from your child. My child, when he was younger, would come in and he would present his top 10 list, like the late night show. And the top 10 things he wanted his teachers to know. And without fail, in those top 10, there would always be something that would make the whole team go, huh, I didn't realize that was a problem. New information. Or, great example, all of a sudden my child was coming home and napping every single day. It was very odd. It wasn't like him, something was off. Well, come to find out, my child had also been telling all of his teachers that his epilim was broken for a matter of months, and no one had followed up. Listening fatigue was very real. My opinion in that case, they needed to know that information. Last on this, you have a right to request a new ARD meeting up to every 10 days if necessary. Now, I highly recommend you do not request a new ARD meeting every 10 days. No one wants to go to an ARD meeting every 10 days. And I mean, no one. The point in saying this, though, is that you do not have to wait until your next annual ARD to make a change. If something is not going well, if something is not working, if something needs to be changed, or if your child's making great progress and maybe you need to put more challenge in those goals, maybe they've made more progress than people thought and a change of placement is necessary, you can call that ARD anytime to say, let's do something different. Having that common experience, that common language, really just knowing your team, being part of that team, making it clear that you're one of the team, gets everybody on the same page. Next slide.
So here's some questions that I thought might be good to ask during your meeting. So the first one is really kind of directed towards someone who did not do the evaluation, but should have read and reviewed it. Maybe the diagnostician did the evaluation and you're discussing with the classroom teacher, you know my child really well, so was there any part of the evaluation or the assessment that was surprising to you, and maybe why? Oh, in my classroom, the seating arrangement is different, so I can tell that in a one-on-one quiet setting with fewer distractions, he or she performed better. Okay, then we can discuss what other things could we do to have a better outcome. And then what do you think of the conclusion? Because some of the evaluation data, when you meet for an FIE, it's kind of confusing. There's a lot of numbers and there's bell curves and there's just a lot to it. So if you just ask someone's opinion, that could give you some really great information about, I agree with the results or I don't agree. I'm seeing a totally different kid in the classroom or in specials, large group situation, or in a social setting. So asking those questions will give you some good perspective there. Is there anything that's still unclear about how my child learns? I think that we do some good assessment, but there's some pieces that we don't always think about, and having a parent bring it up and making sure that the team has looked at every different component is important. If we're talking about social skills, like Sarah said, if we're talking about advocacy skills, which is a huge important thing that's just not in the typical battery, for you to bring that up would be a really strong point to the team. Asking someone, how could you change the instruction for this information? We have a new target, we have a new goal. What's your plan for presenting that information? What's your plan for teaching this topic? Any strategies that you already use that might be helpful to my child? And then how can we work together for any of those things? What do you need from me to participate in that process? And then really number 7 is to clarify, especially when it comes to math. My personal opinion is the changes that have happened in math curriculum are confusing, and the skills are very different. A lot of word problems, not a lot of straight computation. So getting an example of what this might look like, getting an example of what type of data they're collecting to show progress towards a goal would be nice to know, so that everyone's in full agreement about what the target is and what your child will be evaluated on as far as weekly data. And I want to encourage you to remember that at any point you can say out loud to yourself, this is not how my story is going to end. This is not how my child's story is going to end. If you ask these questions and you're still uncomfortable, trust that feeling. And at any point you can say, I think I'd like to continue this conversation later. And the team needs to respect your opinion there.
Amen. That mama gut, that daddy gut, it is strong and it's rarely wrong.
Was this me or you, Sarah? I've forgotten at this point.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay, read all documents that are sent home. Ask for corrections, clarification. Get a lot of questions about progress reports. They should be coming home from any therapist that your child sees as often as their report card. Now, before you go freak out on a therapist about how you're not getting progress reports, and this includes your itinerant teachers, ask them how they send it home instead of asking, why aren't you sending it home? Because often what happens is it's getting sent home and it's ending up dust in the bottom of a backpack before it gets to you. So go into that with a grain of salt. Maybe look for a different way to get it home. See if they can email you progress reports. Document everything in writing, keep and organize your paperwork. Big fan of emails. Even if you have a verbal conversation with someone, go home then and write an email. Hey, great visiting with you. It's so great to chat. Just to confirm what we talked about, ABC, talk to you Friday. You put it in writing that you had this conversation, life goes on. Be informed, know your rights. It's okay to ask for mediation if something were to get extremely heated. I just worked with a district who told someone that they could only get mediation if they filed due process, and that is not true. At any point, if you are having struggles with your district and you really feel like you need mediation, they are required, you ask for it and they're required to bring in a third-party mediator. Filing complaints, sometimes it's necessary and it's okay. Ask questions, stay calm, talk to your kid. Sometimes we spend a lot of time fighting for something that our kid really doesn't want, and that can be a tough pill to swallow as well. Learn the lingo. We've got a great link in here for some of this IEP Def Ed lingo, and then just keep talking to people regularly. I work with my son's itinerant teacher to send kind of a newsletter, just so we keep his issues in the forefront of their brain. Just every couple of weeks, just a little, literally 2 to 3 sentence note, something new they should know, something to watch for, nothing major, just something to keep them thinking. I do also just want to say, with all of this, that there's very often good documents and good precedents for the things that you believe are probably the right thing to do. So before you panic and before you get really upset and freak out and cause yourself a lot of stress over something, please reach out and ask for help. Because chances are there's a way for you to solve a problem, or at least feel less crazy, that you're not crazy, without going through a lot of drama with your school. Next slide. This is my favorite thing in the whole wide world. This is the PEI attachment. It's the opposite of IEP. And this is just a place for you to keep track of the things you're asking for. You just write down what you're proposing, whether it was accepted or rejected, what their reasons were, the start date, and the responsible party. Key points there. Because if they say, oh, great, we're going to do that, but they only ever put it in the notes, never make it an actual goal, don't give you a start date, and no one was really responsible for it, well, suddenly we have a whole lot of nothing happening. So this is just one way for you to keep track of the things you're asking for and help kind of organize your brain before a meeting. Next slide. Yep. Okay, so just a quick breeze by before we kind of end our portion. I did just want to let everybody know, part of advocating for your child is being aware of other advocacy issues that are coming up that could affect your child. In the last legislative session here in Texas, we did some work with House Bill 490, which was the hearing aid legislation. We just wanted to make you guys aware so that as you hear these things come around, you'll be familiar with it. Of the 3 main things you'll see coming through in this next Texas legislative session. The first being a literacy and language tracking bill. We saw a little bit of this in the last session under the title of Lead K. This is not specifically being worked on by the Lead K group. It's just literacy and language tracking. Definitely keep an eye on it. Could be some very good stuff there. Second is simply a bill that would replace all language in the legislative process to reflect deaf, hard of hearing instead of hearing impaired. The third is language that would allow information on newborn to refer on their newborn hearing screening to be sent to the Educational Resource Center on Deafness in Austin instead of just to the Department of State Health Services, so that more of our deaf, hard of hearing babies can get connected to early services sooner instead of getting lost in the system. So we wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And we've got some links available for you to view our legislative update pages. Next slide.
If you look at the first link here, that will take you to the Deaf Child Bill of Rights, which I really encourage all parents to review. And then the two different pieces of legislation that Sarah just mentioned. If you Google Texas Deaf Children's Policy Conversation, there's actual meetings that you can attend to participate in discussions that will be part of that legislation to come. So they're usually held in Austin, so if you're local to that area, that's a good way to participate as well. And then, of course, we talked about advocacy. If you feel like you are in need of an advocate, please visit our website and you can apply to communicate with an advocate. And I am an ASHA advocate. I really enjoy being a part of that community and helping families, and hopefully I'll be able to reach out to some of you guys pretty soon.
I just want to say our ASTRA advocates are the best. Their specialty is advocacy in deaf, hard of hearing. So, you know, they're going to have different experience when it comes to advocating for language choice, advocating for your child to be with, you know, communication peers, least restrictive environment as it applies to a deaf, hard of hearing child. There's some specific issues as it applies to deaf, hard of hearing kids that our advocates just are going to have a little bit of a different perspective on. Other things you can do today include requesting a Guide with the Guide by Your Side program. Maybe you don't need an educational advocate right now, but you would just like somebody to talk more with and get a little more support from. That's what we're there for. You can join our Facebook group. This is a pretty new thing, but we've got about 225 parents over there in our group. A lot of great information. You can find a lot of these links and resources there. You can sign up to receive our newsletter, and most importantly, you can order the advocacy book. I love and adore this book. I take it everywhere. I get it close up to my screen. It is wonderful and beautiful. If you got your video up, I'm holding it up. This is educational advocacy specific to deaf, hard of hearing kids. Read it, love it, buy it for your favorite deaf ed teacher. Order 36 copies. And then my contact information and Eli's contact information is there at the bottom.
Okay, great. Thank you, ladies. Jennifer, you still with us?
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, there we go. All right. I got nervous for a second. I was like, it's been working this whole time. And now I'm up and it's
Okay.
going wonky. Okay, so I'm going to be talking with you guys a little bit. I guess first I should introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Johnson, and I have been in the field of deaf education for about 10 years. I started out as an interpreter and then got certified and taught in the classroom, and then I was an instructional specialist. I'm currently a teaching fellow at the University of North Texas, pursuing my doctorate in special education with a concentration in emotional behavioral disorders. And so the reason I got involved in this particular PhD concentration is because in my own classroom, I saw so many issues with behavior and social skills, just not being on par with where I really wanted them and where they needed to be. And so my research interests are specifically surrounding emotional behavioral issues in children who are deaf. So the topic I'm going to be talking about tonight is one that is near and dear to my heart. It's affected me personally as well as professionally, and that is the safety of children. There are 6 factors that have been proven by research to promote well-being in children. Part of that, and it starts from birth. I mean, this isn't something that starts in elementary school or high school or middle school when we hit puberty. It really starts right at birth, and it starts with nurturing and attachment. It starts with knowledge of parenting and knowing what the developmental milestones are, being aware of your own resilience, knowing that you need to have social connections, having those concrete supports that you can call up and say, hey, I need help. And Guide by Your Side is a great program to be connected with if you don't have that concrete support right now. And then also the social and emotional competence of children. Those are all factors that we know based on research are super important to preventing child maltreatment and addressing safety. So what we are trying to do is we're going to be talking about how we can address safety in the IEP. And it's a tricky issue, but I think it's something that's becoming more common and becoming more acceptable. And I think that really I think the parents are the ones that really have to kind of push forward with the initiative that Hands and Voices has to address safety, just because it's not something that is specifically required by law. So a lot of times you'll hear educators talk about the legal framework, and that's just a fancy word that means, is this required by law? What's required by law, and how does what I want fit into the legal framework? What is required by law? So safety goals, that term safety is not required by law. There's nothing that talks about safety in the law. However, what it does say in the law, and this is really important to understand, is that all schools are required to address in each IEP academic and functional critical needs. And so those issues that would fall under functional would be things like communication and language and reading and self-advocacy and health and social emotional needs. And just like Sarah was saying earlier, sometimes those are the particular topics that don't get addressed in an IEP. Most of the time we're going to have a reading, we're going to have a writing, we're going to have a math and a science and a social studies, and maybe we're even going to have like a language and a speech, but it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be covering areas like health and social emotional needs and self-advocacy, unless your school is really kind of gotten on board with the concept of addressing the full range of functional needs. So it is something that is required by law, though. It's required by law that all of those functional critical needs are addressed. And so what I want to talk with you about is, what does that look like? What does it look like to address safety? What is safety? How do we know if our kids have the skills they need to be safe? There is a QR code that's on the screen, and if you scan that with your phone, you can do it now or you can do it later. That will take you to a document that's called the Safety Checklist document. And what's really special, I think, about this document is that it has compiled what we call protective factors and risk factors. So it said, okay, what are the things that we could give kids and families that would help them protect against this ever happening to them? And then what are some things that when they get a little bit older, and when I say older, I mean like ages like 3, 4 through high school. So we've got early childhood where we're talking about protective factors. And then we've got age 3 through age 21 where we're talking about risk factors, which is that, okay, now I'm out of the home. I'm not with mom or dad or grandma or at daycare every day. I'm at school. I'm in different situations socially where I have to kind of maneuver life, and I have to know what's safe and what's not safe. And sometimes our kids don't know that. And that's hearing kids too. That's all kids. So on that document, what it's going to show you is examples. It's going to talk about, these are the protective factors, these are the risk factors, and here's the goals that you could ask for. Remember, Sarah said you have the right to present goals. You have the right to come to our meeting and say, this is what my child needs. Here's a weakness I see that I think is critical. And you have the right to bring those. So what I want to do is talk about a couple of areas that you can kind of self-assess and figure out if that's an area that you need to address with your child. So I want to start out and I want to talk about the babies, the 0 to 3, and you guys that are falling in this category are going to be working with an IFSP. And so there are a couple of things that we can work on in the ages of 0 to 3 that can help prevent maltreatment in the future. And so those things are like building trust. So that's very simple things like, when the baby cries, do I respond to the baby? And I'm not talking about, sleep training and things like that. I'm just talking about, when I know my baby's upset and hungry, do I respond to that? Does my child understand what safe, like that's not safe, when I say that's not safe, do they understand what that means? Things like attachment. Do I feel a healthy attachment with my baby? These are all things that we can ask ourselves. Am I bonding? Do I have support from other parents? And that's something, again, that Hands and Voices has so many resources to help you connect with other parents. Are you aware of those milestones? You kind of have to keep your expectations in check. Even with a hearing baby, you don't know. It's like, are they supposed to be talking by now? Are they not supposed to be talking? Are they supposed to be crawling? Are they not supposed to be crawling? There's so much information out there. So just having an idea of what should I be expecting really helps to help you stay calm and not become frustrated and kind of lower the risk that something could happen that you wouldn't want to happen. Also, using respite care and engaging in self-care. And these are all things you notice that are kind of about the parent, because between ages 0 to 3, we're mostly, we are the child's whole world, so it's working on things like boundaries, feelings, just helping them figure out the world, helping them learn to ask questions, and just having simple safety rules like, what does it mean to hold my hand and why do we hold hands? And they don't even have to understand exactly what it is, but you just want to start talking about these things. Hygiene, why do we wash our hands? So it really even just goes back to that language acquisition piece where we want to talk about everything we're doing. We want to start early teaching them that, we stay together when we're in the store, and we want to teach them about their bodies. We don't want to wait until they're 8 years old, to start talking about the names of body parts and where it's okay to touch and where it's not okay to touch. We want them to really not even remember when those topics were brought up. We want it to be so fluid and so ingrained from the very beginning. And then moving on to elementary considerations. So one of the things you want to start asking yourself when you get into the elementary years is, can your child identify safe friends and adults and peers and role models? Can they tell you their names? Can they tell you what they did at their friend's house? Can they identify what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? Can they express and can they label their emotions? Can they describe their health? Like, I don't feel good. What doesn't feel good? Can they explain to you what doesn't feel good? Do they have, broad concepts about hygiene and unsafe situations? These are all things that can be addressed in an IEP. And so one of the things that I want to talk about really briefly, especially with this slide, is how do I make this fit in the legal framework? How do I make this fit within the rules of the law? So I want to look over here and I want to see where it says the right to say no. Okay, and it says the children have the right to say no, why, how, when, and where this right can be used, and then that it changes over time and what to do if it's not respected. That's a social emotional issue. That can be addressed as a social emotional goal. It could also be addressed as a communication goal. If I can't express my displeasure, if I can't express that, no, I don't want that, that's a communication issue. So that's how this issue of not being able to say no, or not knowing that they have a right to say no, which is really a safety issue, can fit under communication, can fit under social emotional, and even really under self-advocacy. Can I stand up for myself and say no? It's so fluid. You can really fit a lot of these under many different categories that are commonly addressed. And so I think that's key. When you bring a goal to the table at an ARD meeting, you want to be able to say, hey, my kid, he doesn't know how to tell if he's in danger, and he doesn't know the difference in a surprise and a secret, and he doesn't know the difference in telling and tattling. That's a language issue. And even though in your mind you're thinking that's really a safety issue, what you can communicate is, I'm concerned that my child isn't safe because he doesn't have these language skills. And so it's really a way of how do you communicate with the school about what your concerns are, but also kind of use the language that helps them understand that, yes, this is something that should be addressed. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and so this is middle and high school considerations. Again, it's some of the same questions. It's things like, can we identify safe adults, friends, peers, and role models? Can we identify appropriate and inappropriate things? What risks are? Can they appropriately advocate for their needs? And then I think where it gets a little bit more specific with middle school and high school are things like this: social media. We need to know cyber safety. Guys, it is, when I even just hear like my nieces and nephews who are hearing talk about some of the things that they do online, like I really had to, as an aunt, be like, okay, listen, let's talk about this. You don't tell people where you live. You don't tell them what school you go to, all these things that I take for granted as an adult. And I never had to be taught that. I kind of learned that as an adult because the internet wasn't around when I was in well, it was sort of around. I mean, it was coming about, but it wasn't like it is now. So these are issues that I had to deal with. And so it's something that I don't really think about, but it's something we really have to think about with this generation of kids, is monitoring that social media, knowing who they're talking to online. I know that you see the stories about, human trafficking and all that. It's super scary, but it's so preventable as long as we're really knowing who our kids are talking to, where, monitoring what they're doing on the internet. And then the other thing is knowing teachers and coach names, knowing your child's friends' names, knowing names of clergy members. Research shows that when abuse occurs, it's often someone who's close to the family. And so you really want to make sure, of course, no one ever expects that, a clergy or a coach or a teacher or, a neighbor or an aunt or an uncle is going to abuse their child, but it happens all the time, guys. So just making sure they know the names. Some other skills, again, that tattling versus telling. We tell kids, don't tattle, don't tattle, don't tattle. But then it's like, do we teach them that telling anything that someone did bad is tattling? Do we really discriminate? I don't think so. And I think sometimes hearing kids, they learn that they kind of just figure it out. They have this incidental learning that goes on. But with my deaf and hard of hearing kids in my classroom, they just didn't. I had to really teach them, okay, here's what tattling means. Here's what telling means. Telling is about safety. And so it's really important to do that. And then also sex ed is something that, it's not going to be incidentally learned. Even if you have a hearing child, do you really want them to incidentally learn, about sexual issues? Probably not. So it's something that can be addressed, and it can be addressed in the IEP. These are all things that can be addressed under health. So you really just have to look at, okay, this is the safety issue I want to address. How can I address this in the IEP under those areas? Okay, next slide. Is that it? Okay. Okay, so that was just a really brief, touch the surface kind of overview of safety goals. If you're interested in further information about that, I would love for you to contact me. My contact information is on here. There's also an article that just came out that I wrote in Odyssey Magazine, and it talks about what teachers can do in the classroom, 5 easy things that they can implement on a daily basis to help address safety. So I think it would be awesome if you showed up on the first day of school and said, hey, I found this article, or send the link. There are things that are really easy that teachers can implement in the classroom first day of school to really help kids. And it's things you can do at home too. So I think that's it for me. Again, if you're interested in this topic and you want to hear more about it, I'm sure that Kelly and I can get together and figure out a kind of a full webinar on the issues and really dig deep into how do we address these at home, and also in the IEP.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. We ran a little long because we had a whole bunch of information to pack in there. I'm going to do another poll for you guys real quick. And while we're doing that, let me see how to do this. If we can get to the Q&A, if you can type in any questions that you have for us, we'll try to pull a couple of those and answer them. And then launching the poll now. Any that we do not get to, we will try to go back and write out the answers for you, and we should have everybody's email address so we can send that out and send a link to this presentation. Once we have it up, we should be able to put it on our YouTube channel, and you guys can come back and review it again whenever you want to, and we'll also send you the slides if you'd like to have that. So thank you guys for joining us, and just type in some questions, and we'll try to get them answered here in the next 5 minutes, or if you want to stay a few extra minutes long, I think we can do that as well.
Hit me with your questions, guys. I've got nowhere to go. Okay, we've got a question about those developmental checklists. There's a couple, the Dallas Regional Day School actually just they sent me a great developmental checklist. They call it their red flags checklist. Let me see. Trying to see if I can send files through here. May not be able to.
Is there a specific like domain you were thinking of, or just globally? Isabel is who I was referring to, if you don't mind. You can type in chat if you want to just.
Is the chat open to everybody now, Kelly?
I do not have it open. I might be able to do that.
Okay. Because if you're looking at something that covers all domains like cognitive and pragmatics and social emotional skills. So the Minnesota and Iowa that Sarah mentioned, and then on the slide, the one above it, it's a Karen Anderson resource. So if you go to her website, it's successforkidswithhearingloss.com. And if you search pragmatics or social skills or even advocacy, she has a huge list of different resources to access there.
I'm trying to get those links for you right now.
Okay, here's another question. What is a reasonable time frame to expect a goal to be met or progress toward a goal? For example, my child will use the following self-advocacy terms: me, mine, no, don't want, within X period of time. Eli, do you have?
I'm going to try to click on this box. Without knowing present levels, it would be hard for me to answer that question. My goal is to think about 1 year's progress in 1 year's time. That's pretty typically our rule of thumb, if you will, just because we're thinking about what can we address over the course of approximately a school year. If it's something just kind of imagining if it was a skill that I didn't accomplish in a school year and maybe I didn't think it would take another school year to reach that goal, I might say by the end of the first grading period. Or a different way to look at it is my 3-year-old has decided to join us. I might have a goal that has, no, it's not your turn. It has some different components. So I might say by the end of the first grading period, we will have accomplished using mine. And by the end of the second grading period, we will have accomplished using no. And then no, it's not your turn. Third grading period, fourth grading period. All these people are listening to you. Okay? It's my turn. So there's a couple different ways you could set it up depending on the present level and how far you have to go towards the goal. Does that answer your question?
I'm seeing a question here about similar checklists for equipment typically to request and also training for the teachers. As far as equipment to request, really depends on what you're talking about. There's not a checklist for equipment. We do have what we call the IEP checklist. And I put a link in the Q&A box for everybody to our family group. That IEP checklist is already uploaded there, I know for sure. It's also on the Hands and Voices National site. I'm going to pull that link. Gives you an idea of the types of things that you can include in the IEP. So you can't go in and say, I would like this very, very specific piece of equipment unless you have very good reasons for it. However, for example, I went in, like 2 years ago and said, we do need something to address his listening in small group settings. It ended up the best solution was to get new FM equipment that solved the small group setting problem. As far as training for the teachers on how to properly use it all, it's a really common problem and it's often something that's left out of the IEP. I would absolutely say address it in your ARD meetings directly. Ask for teacher training to be written into the IEP. It's often not. Often what families are told is, oh, that's just something we take care of. It's just kind of handled. But what happens is staff changes, somebody quits over the summer. It's not anyone's fault. The people who told you those things had great intentions. But the next thing you know, you're 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in school and you still don't have what you need. So for example, my child's IEP says that actually in the teacher in-service days that the itinerant will meet with the teachers, and then they do another for like a 30-minute just quick overview of the equipment, and then they do another teacher training 2 weeks into school that's a little more in-depth, and that's in his IEP so that I can be sure it happens.
Jennifer, do you want to answer the one that you clicked on? I have to unmute you, don't I?
Okay. Well, yep, there we go. Okay.
Sorry.
So this question was, how can you put in the ARD that your son needs an aid or a shadow during school transitions, restroom break? He's going to be in a wheelchair. So there's a couple of questions that I would have about that. School districts in general are very hesitant to assign a one-on-one assistant, an aide, or a shadow to a child because, well, first of all, it's very expensive, and second, they want to keep the child as independent as possible, and sometimes when you assign a shadow or an aide, it becomes kind of a dependency situation. So those are kind of the two main reasons you'll hear for not wanting to assign a specific aide or a shadow. Now, what in my experience tends to happen is if was it a son, or we didn't say son, yeah. If your son needs assistance during transitions, at restroom breaks, at PE and recess, that could be provided. as an accommodation, but it wouldn't necessarily be an assigned one. It wouldn't be like a one-on-one situation. So for example, let's say your child is in science class, and in that science class there is a teaching assistant who is providing support for other children for whatever reason. So it could be the case that if your son needs to go to the restroom, that teaching assistant would leave the classroom with your student or with your child to go to the restroom. That teaching assistant wouldn't be necessarily assigned to your child, but available there if the need was to arise for your child to need to go to the restroom. I think in order for a student to really get a one-on-one shadow or an aid, there has to be a super, super critical need. Something like almost like a life, what's, how do you say it? Like,
Life altering.
Yes, like for example, I have breathing equipment, or I have, I'm trying to say, you know, all those very fragile, medically fragile situations. But if you can establish that there's a critical need, regardless of how severe it is, then you have a lot better chance of getting the school district to listen to your request. So if you can say, you know, here's the reasons why, you know, maybe at home he's not able to use the restroom without assistance. At home, he's not able to go to the park without assistance. I think it's completely reasonable to say, I want my child to have assistance during these times. Now, how they meet that need, it's different. The school districts handle it differently. They tend, like I said, to not assign a one-on-one person because they don't want to, I mean, it's money and dependency is what they'll say. They don't want to assign a one-on-one person. But he has a right to get his critical needs met. And if his functional critical need is someone to help him in the restroom or someone to help him in PE, then that can be in the IEP. It doesn't matter who is going to be doing that task. It doesn't matter if it's his teacher that assists him in during transition, or if it's a a teaching assistant that's there for whatever other reason that goes with the restroom to him. So it may be different people throughout the day, but however they decide to address the staffing part, they can't make a decision in an ARD meeting based on staffing. They can't say, well, we don't have a person to do that. That's not a reason to not have something in an IEP. We have to make an IEP based on a critical need, and then we figure out the staff to accomplish that IEP. So if you think that your child needs that, absolutely advocate for it. Bring your data. Talk about what your child can do and can't do at home, and really just push. Because if you truly think that they need that assistance, there's no reason why that can't be an accommodation. How they staff it, that's not even a decision for an ARD meeting, really, how it's staffed. That's a whole other issue. The accommodation, though, that's the important thing that needs to be put in the IEP. Because if it's not in the IEP, it's not going to happen. Does that kind of answer the question a little bit?
One thing I wanted to add is if you ask about the child's personal care supplement, it can also be documented there.
Right. I think maybe we have time for one more question. I don't want to go too far over our hour. So, Sarah Milem, do you want to pick one more? And
nope, I'm still good. Let's see. I'm just going to say I will answer one more, and then I will move over to the Facebook group if anybody wants to move over there and keep asking questions for a while. Right. I've got nowhere else to be tonight. Let's see. Catherine, hey, is there a list of sample goals by grade available? Are you talking about academic goals, social emotional? Tell me what you're looking for there. If you're talking about the social emotional self-advocacy, that's that Minnesota, those checklists. If you're talking about academic goals, a lot of times we go back to the state of Texas, the TEKS, what they should be doing at each grade level. But you can ask for more detailed independent grade level testing, things that will tell you that, my child is reading at a 3-year, 6-month level. My child has a, math level of, a 4th grade, 5th month level, so you can get a little more detailed data. And I'm going to work on putting some more of those resources in that family group. And Catherine, I know you are in there.
And Catherine, if you're asking about the safety goals, Jennifer shared that document with the QR at the beginning of her presentation. And there are lots of things on there. Jennifer, if you can shoot that link to me in an email or share it on our Facebook page, I'll make sure that that gets out to everybody as well.
I will also just say, looking over these other questions that have popped up, as far as requesting ARDs and taking forever to get, there are some specific documents that outline exactly what the timelines are. There's a shadow behind me. Hey. Everyone forgets I'm a mom too. There are specific timelines for each thing that has to happen. So I will pull up those timelines and send them out. Because yes, requesting and actually meeting are 2 different things. But we can also hold them accountable to those timelines. And then as far as that being a big ask and that teacher training is actually specifically mentioned in the law. So it's not as big of an ask as you think. And oftentimes when I see something like that, I approach it as, I didn't realize before that this was something I could even ask for. And I was doing some research and I found this. And now that I know this is something we can even address, what can we do about it? And I would talk to the person you're most comfortable talking to about it first. You say he's in pre-K, so go to the highest person that you're comfortable talking to first. The aide's not going to really be able to do anything. If you're comfortable going to that early childhood director, I think that's probably your best move. And just be very frank with them. It's not really as big of an ask as you think.
I want to give a virtual high five for that answer.
I wanted to piggyback on that just from the school side of it. Obviously, it depends who you're talking to. Everyone has a different opinion. I'm always willing to go learn something new. I've definitely had parents ask me, like, are you willing to go learn about this specific topic that concerns my child and it would be new to you? And then when it comes to training on the equipment, if you are working with an itinerant teacher, they might have one small period of time to go out to the mainstream teacher and work with them on equipment or just general strategies for working with a child with hearing loss. But anything that's like consultation, often, not always, but often, they don't get paid to do that. So if you feel like there's some resistance, it's because, I'm not at school right now, so I can say things about money, but in an ARD meeting, schools are not ever allowed to mention the cost of something. So if you get the feeling like they're resistant to add extra consultations outside of the minutes on your child's schedule page, it could be because of that. But I encourage you to push as much as you feel comfortable and think creatively. Could it be an online thing? Could we have them sign up for a free online training that they can access in their own time? And just think of different ways that your staff and the team you're working with can access that training, because it does get a little sticky there.
I would also say sometimes get creative with the kind of training that may need to be offered. Sometimes we think we have an educator that's not meeting our child's needs when really all they need is a little bit of additional training in a specific area. For example, often I hear questions about teachers that don't know what to do with an interpreter in their classroom. They simply don't know how to work with one. And a little training on how to actually work with an interpreter goes a long way in actually getting that kid access in their classroom. And it doesn't have to take 4, 6, or 8 hours to do. So you can think outside of the box on the types of training as well, and see what other local resources are available that may be able to come provide that training. There's training centers in every area of the state that have access specialists, technology specialists, that love to come out and help in any way they can. We're happy to help connect people anywhere we can. We'll all dig in together to find what needs to be done. If you need help brainstorming, that's what we're here for.
All right. With that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody who came on and spent an hour and 15 minutes with us. And we hope this went well. We did have a few glitches at the beginning with captioning and whatnot, but I think this is something that we're going to go forward with and hopefully have at least one a semester, if not more often for the webinars. So we hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, we'll have the PowerPoint out to you in an email, and any questions that we did not get a chance to answer, we'll do our best to get those out to you as well. And thank you to our presenters who did all this work and got all that information out there for you guys, because this was a great overview, and hopefully we can go in depth to some of these a little bit more in the future. Have a great night.
I'll see you in the group that wants to keep going.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys.